say thank you so much for joining this In Conversation for International Women's Day this year in 2021. I'm Ellie Lewis, I'm a trustee, I'm also the board secretary, and I'm here interviewing Hannah and Hayley. So just want to quickly say that Hannah and Hayley are not here via video, but you will hear their lovely voices shortly. And this is just to keep the families and women that they support safe. So Hannah, do you want to quickly say a little bit about yourself, your role at Broxtowe Women's Project?
Yeah, hi, I'm an outreach worker and I support women day to day to help leave abusive relationships, or having left them, help the women to heal and recover.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hayley, do you want to say a little bit about your role?
Yeah, so I'm Hayley and I'm the Children's Service Coordinator. I support children and young people around the domestic abuse that they've experienced and they've witnessed, and we try to support them to move forward after that experience.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So I suppose we're here to talk about the work of Broxtowe Women's Project that you guys are involved in, and really what the impact of COVID-19 has been on your ability to do those roles, and what you see as the impact on, like we say, the women and families in our communities that we help. So we all know, I think, it's been very relevant in the news in the past year. Can we believe it's been that long? Police recorded crime data shows an increase in offences that flagged as domestic abuse cases during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is sort of at the national level, but I wondered if we were seeing those sorts of patterns locally as well in Broxtowe.
I believe that we are, and I think more than anything, Broxtowe Women's Project have specifically seen a rise in the complexity of cases. So whether or not it might not necessarily be more, but the complexity has changed. So for example, during the pandemic, it's much harder for people to leave abuse because their partner is at home, or they may be monitored more, which overall increases risk to safety, and it limits options for victims to get the chance to speak out.
Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? And I suppose you sort of touched a bit on that, Hannah, why that case is, why that is the pattern that we're seeing. Is there any more, do you think, you can say about that, and what that impact is in terms of the complexity, and why it might be different nationally to how it is locally?
Yeah, I think nationally they've kind of given out the national helpline number, so that's been the number that's been out there, which is great. It's raised more awareness, so women, if they're in that crisis situation, if they have a moment, they're more likely to reach out to the national helpline just because they're aware of it. But from a local level, the local support is great because we're in their communities, we know what support can be offered to them, and we just maybe give them a bit more opportunity to feel that actually they can leave, and they've got some local support, they've got someone behind them to help them navigate really through the complexities that the pandemic have brought, whether that be more financial instability, or actually leaving perhaps to get to a refuge.
Thank you. And I think we've all felt this over the past year, that there's definitely been sort of patterns of emotions, and, obviously with the various lockdowns and how that's affected on work, and how we've been able to see friends and family. And I wondered if you'd seen over the past year a certain pattern, have numbers gone up or down, or the complexity sort of during or after, local or national lockdowns?
So I think we find that usually we get a spike in referrals after the holidays are over. So when the children have returned to school in September and January, that's when women will ring. However, since over the last year, as we know, children have been at home for nearly the entire year. So it's basically limited the chance that victims have to be able to reach out.
Yeah. And Hayley, have you seen a pattern? I know, like Hannah said, children have been at home almost the entire year. What has the impact of that been on children, and you know, the impact of domestic abuse on them that you've seen?
So for the children's service, we do run slightly differently. So there's been a slightly different impact. So in terms of the children that we support, we will only support children and young people with they've actually left that domestic abuse situation, because they'd be potentially more at risk if they were still in that situation. So for us, it's been a different set of difficulties. So they've left that situation, but there's been a lot of difficulties around contact with fathers, around following COVID rules, because obviously sometimes fathers don't necessarily follow all the COVID rules, and this makes the mums worry and it makes the children worry. So we've seen a lot of complexity around that. And then also on top of it, we've got children that were struggling with obviously the experiences and the effects of domestic abuse, but now they've got a whole new set of worries. They're worrying about the COVID pandemic, they're worrying about not being in school, nobody can get any space from each other, they're all crammed in together. So it's been really tough for the families and the children, I suppose, dealing with the effects of the domestic abuse that they had before the COVID pandemic, and then during the lockdown, it's been difficult to access the support that they need to be able to move forward and get through that.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll touch a bit more about how you've been able to support them in a little bit, I think, won't we? Yeah, and I suppose that's the next question really, is within your role, Hayley, as we talk about children, how have you been able to continue to support children that, you know, like say they're at home and it's just a bit harder to access the support you're able to give and other support? So how have you been able to do that this year?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely been a challenge, we'll say that much. We've learned from each, I suppose, lockdown that this is not something that's going to go away within 5 minutes. So we've had to plan accordingly each time, obviously, something's popped up. So during the first lockdown, we wasn't necessarily prepared to be able to do online working or anything like that. So we decided that we'd support the parents in the interim, and we'd speak to the parents and see how they're doing, if there's anything we can do to support them, to support their children, young people. Any older children, young people that have capacity to be able to access that support in their own right, we did that through email and phone calls and things like that. And then luckily, by the time we got to was it the second lockdown in November, was it? By then, it was fully prepared to be able to go online. So at the moment, that's how we're managing. We're managing to do Zoom sessions on a weekly basis with children and young people. We originally thought it wasn't going to go very well, but it's actually gone really, really well. And the children and young people have been really happy to accept that support. It's a little bit difficult in terms of the types of things you will discuss because of confidentiality. Usually we get to be in a room on our own, everything's confidential, and it can be a bit different when you're in a family and there's lots of other people in the house and they might be worried about someone possibly listening in. So we have had to scale back our support a little bit in terms of the depth of things we talk about in our sessions, but we've still been able to keep that weekly contact going, which the children and the parents have been really, really happy about, actually, because unfortunately some services haven't been able to do that. So it's been great that we can offer that.
That's fantastic. I just wonder, have you had any issues with children not being able to access those sort of, you know, the digital support, either not having laptops, not having Wi-Fi, whatever it might be?
Yes, we have. So we've had a few children that have struggled due to the fact that some of them are all sharing one iPad to do school Zoom sessions and domestic abuse support Zoom sessions. So it's been quite difficult in terms of time that they can access that. I've had one young person that I've been working with, and unfortunately she's trying to use the Zoom on her dad's phone, and I think one of our sessions cut out the other week because dad's data ran out. So there's been a few teething issues, but luckily most schools now put things in place for the children that didn't have access to laptops and things like that. It took a little while, but all the children I'm supporting at the moment do have access. The only other difficulty is that some children wasn't necessarily, Zoom wasn't suitable for them. So some children that are really, really young or have really complex needs, children particularly with ADHD and autism, they can't concentrate on the Zoom. It's far too boring. Yeah, there's been a few difficulties, but like I say, it has been where we haven't been able to do those direct Zoom sessions. Again, we're trying to support the parents and we're speaking to the school and other professionals, trying to support them the best that we can.
Brilliant, thank you. And Hannah, so same question really, how have you been able to carry on your role this past difficult year, supporting women and the families as well, you know, remotely, or what sort of things have you been able to do?
Yeah, so the outreach team, they've continued to provide, excellent support to women over the phone and by email, whichever is safest for them. We're regularly applying for COVID emergency grants for our women, which help with energy bills and debt, food as well. We've increased our wellbeing programme, so we offer women the chance to meet in groups on Zoom, and they focus on self-esteem and positive mental health. So, I mean, additionally, we've offered counselling on Zoom, and with the help of our volunteers, we've managed to deliver crafts and activities to families with children to support them during the holidays and through homeschooling. So, although it's taken a few months, as Hayley said, to kind of realise, oh, we're going to have to completely change the way that we work, I think we've really adapted well to that now.
That's fantastic to hear. I imagine it was quite a challenge initially when you sort of March, April 2020 to sort of put those things in place.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, I think we often talk about all the challenges of COVID-19 and the negative impacts it's had on our lives and services that we provide. But I wondered if you can think of any positives that have come from the last year in the global pandemic. I'm just thinking in terms of perhaps awareness around domestic abuse. Like I mentioned at the start, it's obviously been in the news quite a bit, maybe more than it has before. Just wondered, either of you have any views on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think so many people have become more aware of the challenges of domestic abuse, and the question, like, why doesn't she just leave? I think that started to get answered for many people as they've understood the reasons why victims struggle to leave, and even more so now in a pandemic. Domestic abuse has become a hot topic of discussion globally, as well as nationally and locally, as sadly the homicide rate increased during lockdown. So that kind of awareness and the additional funding from the government, has been vital, really.
Absolutely. Hayley, do you have anything to add in terms of the positives?
I'd agree with Hannah, really. I suppose the other thing that's been positive from the terms of the children's service is the fact that we've realised that there's lots of other ways that we can tap into supporting children and young people. I think before the idea of doing a Zoom session, we never would have even considered it. But I do have some children and young people that do struggle sometimes face to face. Sometimes they don't want you to come into their school, or they don't want you to come into their college. So then you've got to find a space outside of that, usually a free space, which aren't for that gold dust, trying to find a free space. So the fact that we can now offer that as something as well I think is really, really good, actually, because I don't think we'd ever would have thought of this before.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, and I suppose it really cuts down in terms of travel as well, doesn't it? Any sort of bus fare or whatever it might be required. So yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, great. And so obviously we had Boris's announcement yesterday. Things are starting to look a bit more hopeful in terms of lifting lockdown restrictions over the next few months, however quickly that realistically happens. I just wondered what you thought the impact might be of that lifting of the lockdown on the women and families that you've been supporting, whether you get any sense of what might happen as we return to something close to normal, whatever that is, moving forwards. Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm just trying to take things, day by day, month by month. If anything, the last year's taught me that the unknown, if anything can happen these days. So I think it will be interesting, adapting and going back into maybe a bit more of a normality. And but I think as a service, we'll be able to offer so much more support in different ways now. And I think we'll keep some of the things we've been doing, like the Zoom sessions, because they're so accessible for women with children or babies at home, and even people in different parts of the borough that might not be able to travel usually to groups or freedom programs. They can have access to that. So I think that will be really good. I just hope that kind of the important work of domestic abuse outreach services and refuges will continue to be recognised by the government, and by local communities, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hayley, any thoughts?
I think in terms of the children and young people, I think it's a difficult one, because I have a few children and young people where lockdown has actually been a slight blessing in disguise for them, because they struggle with social anxiety, they struggle with things at school, things like that. So for them, they've dealt with a few things that they wouldn't have dealt with before lockdown. But I'm also very mindful that I've got a lot of young children and people that are kind of they're struggling with their mental health. So I think the worry for me, not so much a worry, but when everything does open up again and the children are able to go back to school, that the schools and the government and other people in place recognise that this has had a massive effect on all children and young people's mental health, let alone those children and young people that have also had to deal with domestic abuse and trauma and things like that. So I think it's going to be great for some of those children to be able to get back out into the world and be able to see their peers and see their friends that keep them strong. But at the same time, I'm hoping that that is taken into consideration, that their mental health needs are vital. And as much as their education is vital, I'm very much a big advocate for mental health definitely comes first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's moving ahead, but remembering what we've all collectively been through and the impact that it's had. Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah.
I just wondered if either of you or both of you had any advice for anyone listening to this, you know, whilst we're all in lockdown still, so anyone experiencing domestic abuse at the moment, what advice would you give to those people?
I'd just say reach out and talk to somebody. So whether that's the National 24-hour helpline, could be the Women's Aid live chat on their website, the police, a trusted family member or a friend, or, you know, contact us at BWP by email, text or phone. The important thing is that you've reached out and you've started something, and you've started to kind of open up a little bit on maybe what you're living in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, so as I mentioned at the start, these series of conversations with are part of Broxtowe Women's Project's celebration of International Women's Day. As part of that, one of the main themes this year is #ChooseToChallenge. So I'm going to ask you in a moment for you to both say what you'd like to choose to challenge today. But I want to say that my choose to challenge is to challenge victim blaming and centering conversations around domestic abuse around the person who actually is at the hands of the abuser. I want us to really start asking the question of why these perpetrators are inflicting this cycle of abuse on the victims. And I think, as Hannah alluded to, you know, we're starting to have those conversations. And I think a lot of the things in the media recently has helped to start asking those questions. So that's my choose to challenge. Hannah, what would you like to choose to challenge?
I'm going to try, and I would choose to challenge gender bias and help to form a gender equal world.
Fantastic, thank you. Hayley?
So I've actually thought about this quite a lot, and one thing that's come up this year, last year, forgetting what year it is, there was a lot of information around discrimination and things like that, and as part of that, BWP set up our inclusive practice subgroup, and as a part of that, I've had the chance to attend a lot of meetings. I've got a lot of information around the impact on inequality and discrimination. So my choose to challenge is all around challenging all forms of discrimination and inequality within the domestic abuse services.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you both for joining today. It's been really informative and really interesting to hear you speak. So thank you very much. And a very happy International Women's Day to you both.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Same to you.